My son called the cops to kick me out, but when the officer read the deed, he froze. "Ma'am, this house is yours." That's what the police officer said, standing in my own living room, holding a piece of paper that turned my son's face the color of old ash. I watched 41 years of assumptions crumble in about 6 seconds. But before I tell you how we got to that moment, before I tell you what happened after, I need you to do 2 things for me. Hit that like button because it genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to hear that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. And subscribe because I've got more stories like this one, stories about what happens when people think grandma's too old and too soft to fight back. Now drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from tonight. I love scrolling through and seeing all the different cities and countries where people are curled up with a cup of tea listening to an old woman tell her story. Alright, let's get into it. My name is Sandra. I'm 74 years old, and until 11 months ago, I thought I understood my own son. I raised him myself mostly. His father left when he was 6 and I worked 2 jobs, days at a dry cleaner's, nights doing books for a small trucking company, to keep a roof over our heads. That exact roof is what this story is about. I bought this house in 1987. I was 35 years old, freshly divorced, with a boy who cried himself to sleep some nights because he missed a father who didn't deserve to be missed. I scraped together a down payment that took me 4 years to save. 4 years of skipping vacations, wearing the same coat until it had more patches than original fabric, and telling my son we'd get name brand cereal when things got better. Things got better. I bought this house with my name on the deed alone, and I have paid the mortgage, the taxes, the roof repairs, and every single utility bill for 39 years. My son's name, I'll just call him my son for this story because after everything, I don't feel like giving him the dignity of a name people will remember, grew up in this house. He got married in the backyard. His 2 kids, my grandchildren, took their first steps on this living room carpet. For most of his life, he was a good son. Called me every Sunday. Came over for dinner. Helped me with my taxes when I got too old to trust my own arithmetic. I want you to understand that this story isn't about a monster who was always cruel. It's about how money and entitlement can slowly turn a decent person into someone you don't recognize. The trouble started about 3 years ago, when his marriage fell apart and he lost his job in the same brutal 6-month stretch. He was drowning financially, emotionally, all of it. And because I'm his mother, and because that's what mothers do, I opened my door and told him to move in with me until he got back on his feet. I didn't ask for rent. I didn't ask for a timeline. I just wanted my boy to have a safe place to land. He landed, all right. He landed and he stayed. 3 years. During those 3 years, something shifted in him that I didn't notice happening in real time. The way you don't notice a plant growing until one day it's twice the size and wrapping itself around the fence. He started treating this house less like his mother's home, and more like an inheritance he was simply waiting to collect early. He started making little comments. "When this place is mine, I'm going to redo the kitchen. You really don't need 4 bedrooms, Mom, once I take over." I laughed those off at first. I thought it was just talk, the kind of thing people say when they're trying to feel like they have control over a life that's currently a mess. But then he started dating someone new about 1.5 years ago. And that's when things really changed. I won't use her name either, but I will tell you she had a way of looking at this house like she was doing inventory. She'd walk through the rooms commenting on what she'd update or get rid of. She never once asked me what I liked. She'd sit at my own kitchen table and tell my son, right in front of me, that it was honestly kind of wild that a woman my age was living in all this space by herself. As if 70+ years of paying for something myself made me a burden on my own square footage. I started feeling like a guest in my own home. Little things at first. They stopped asking if I wanted anything when they went to the store. They rearranged my furniture to make more sense of the flow without asking. My son began referring to the guest room, my sewing room, the one place in this whole house that was entirely mine, as the nursery, because apparently they were planning to have children and had already mentally redecorated a room that had my grandmother's quilting frame in it. I brought it up gently. I said, "Honey, I love having you here, but I need you to remember this is still my house, and I'd appreciate being included in decisions about it." He got defensive. Said I was being dramatic and controlling. Said that considering how much he'd put into the house over the past 3 years, which as far as I could tell, meant mowing the lawn occasionally and replacing a garbage disposal once, he had earned some say in how things were run. I should have put my foot down right then. I know that now. But I was 73 years old, tired, and I desperately wanted to believe my son still respected me somewhere underneath all that entitlement. So I let it slide. I told myself it was temporary, that once they got married and found their own place, things would go back to normal. They did not find their own place. Instead, about 4 months ago, they got engaged. And instead of that being a moment where they finally started making plans to move out and build their own life, it became the moment my son decided he didn't need to pretend anymore. He sat me down at my own kitchen table, the one I bought in 1994, the one I still remember hauling into this house myself because the delivery guys wanted an extra $50 I didn't have. And he told me that he and his fiancée had talked it over and decided it made the most sense for me to consider other living arrangements so they could start their life together in the house. I want you to sit with that phrase for a second. Consider other living arrangements. In my own house. The one with my name on the deed. The one I paid off completely 11 years earlier, with a payoff party I threw for myself because nobody else was going to celebrate it with me. I asked him calmly whose name was on the deed. He waved his hand like it was a technicality. He said, "Mom, come on, we all know I'm basically inheriting this place anyway. Might as well start living like it now instead of waiting for you to." He didn't finish that sentence. He didn't have to. I heard the words he swallowed just as clearly as if he'd said them. I told him no. I told him this was my house, I built my life around it, and I wasn't going anywhere. And that should have been the end of it. That should have been a conversation between a mother and son that ended with an apology and maybe some hard truths about boundaries. Instead, it escalated into something I never in 100 years thought my own child would do to me. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon, there was a knock at my door. It was a police officer. Young man, polite, clearly uncomfortable. He told me he'd received a call about a domestic dispute regarding unauthorized occupancy and needed to speak with me about the property. I stood there in my own doorway in the house I'd owned for 39 years, being asked by a police officer about my right to be there. My son was standing behind him on the porch, arms crossed, looking somewhere between smug and nervous, like a kid who'd finally pulled the trigger on a plan he'd been half hoping someone would talk him out of. He had told the officer that the house was in the process of transferring to him, that I was an aging relative who was refusing to leave despite an agreed-upon arrangement, and that he needed the police to help him enforce the transition. He'd built an entire story, ma'am and officer both, where I was the confused elderly woman overstaying my welcome in a home that was rightfully becoming his. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry, though God knows I wanted to. I looked at that officer and I said, "I'd like to show you something. Please come in." And I walked to the fireproof filing box I keep in my bedroom closet, the same box that has held every important document of my adult life, and I pulled out the deed to my house. My name. Only my name. Purchased in 1987. Paid in full in 2015. Not a single other name on that document. Not my ex-husband's, not my son's, nobody's. I watched that officer's face change as he read it. He looked up at my son, then back at the paper, then he said the words that I will remember until the day I die. "Ma'am, this house is yours." He said it slowly, like he wanted to make sure everyone in that doorway heard it clearly, including the man who'd called him there under false pretenses. My son's face turned pale. Genuinely pale, like all the blood had decided to relocate somewhere else in his body. He started stammering something about how it was supposed to be his eventually, how we talked about it, which we absolutely had not in the way he was implying. The officer, to his credit, was firm but professional. He explained to my son that calling law enforcement to remove a legal homeowner from their own property, based on a fabricated story about inheritance rights, was not just inappropriate. It could be considered a false police report, which carries real legal consequences. I could have pressed the issue right there. I could have watched my son get handcuffed on my porch in front of the neighbors, and honestly, a small petty part of me that I'm not proud of wanted exactly that. But I asked the officer if I could speak to my son privately instead, and he agreed to give us a few minutes, staying close enough to intervene if needed. I turned to my son, this grown man, this 39-year-old who I had rocked to sleep and bandaged skinned knees and stayed up all night with when he had the flu, and I asked him one question. "When did you start seeing me as an obstacle instead of your mother?" He didn't have an answer. Not a real one. He mumbled something about financial pressure, about wanting to give his fiancée a fresh start, about how everyone assumes the kids get the house eventually anyway. I told him that assuming something doesn't make it true, and that even if I had planned to leave him this house someday, which after that afternoon I was no longer certain I would, there is a profound difference between inheriting something from a mother who chooses to give it to you, and forcing that mother out of her own home while she's still alive to fight back. Here's the part of this story that I think matters most, the part one really wants you to sit with if you're dealing with anything similar in your own family. I did not let that moment turn me bitter and vengeful in a way that destroyed everything. But I also did not let it slide the way I had every other slight over the previous 3 years. I told my son that he and his fiancée had 30 days to find their own place. Not because I wanted to punish him forever, but because I needed him to understand in a way that words apparently hadn't accomplished, that this house was mine, that my life and my choices were mine, and that respect isn't something you're entitled to just because you're waiting around for someone to die. He tried to argue. He tried the guilt trips, the after everything I've done for you, the you're really going to do this to your own son routine. I want you to know something about guilt trips when you're 74 years old. They lose almost all of their power. I have buried a husband who left me, buried my own parents, buried 2 dear friends just in the last 5 years. I have very little patience left for manufactured guilt from a grown man who tried to have his mother removed from her own home. He moved out 26 days later. His fiancée, interestingly enough, seemed to lose quite a bit of enthusiasm for the relationship once it became clear there was no house attached to it. They are, as far as I understand from my grandchildren, no longer together. I won't pretend that doesn't feel like a small, private kind of justice, though I try not to dwell on it too much. The house is quiet now. Quieter than it's been in 3 years. I redid that sewing room myself, put my grandmother's quilting frame back exactly where it belongs, and I have never once regretted the decision I made that afternoon on my own front porch. My relationship with my son is still healing. We talk sometimes. He apologized eventually in a way that felt more real than his first attempts. I don't know if we'll ever get back to where we were before all this, and I've made peace with the possibility that we might not. But I want to say something directly to anyone watching this who's in a similar situation. Whether it's a son, a daughter, a niece, a nephew, anyone who's started treating your home, your money, your independence like it's already theirs simply because they're waiting for their turn. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to protect what you built with your own 2 hands, your own sacrifices, your own decades of hard work. Getting older does not mean getting weaker. It does not mean forfeiting your right to your own life, your own home, your own dignity. I spent 39 years paying for every square inch of this house, and I was not about to spend my last years being pushed out of it by someone who thought my age made me an inconvenience instead of a person. If there's one thing I hope you take from my story tonight, it's this: your name on that deed, that title, that account means something. Never let anyone, especially someone you love, convince you otherwise. If this story meant something to you, I'd be so grateful if you'd give it a like and subscribe for more. And I still want to know, where are you watching from tonight? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and honestly, hearing from all of you around the world reminds me that none of us are ever really as alone as we feel in our hardest moments. Thank you for sitting with me tonight. I'll see you in the next one.